So, welcome everyone. We are so excited to welcome you to a conversation that will take us here, there, and everywhere. We don't yet know. And that's exactly why we're having it, because that's why we have these kind of deep, probing, meandering conversations. So, I would love for Pearl to introduce herself, and then I'll introduce myself, and we'll dive into wherever it is we're meant to go today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Pearl Gregor. I'm the author of 3 books on dreams along the way. And I've also read Marisa's books. And so we're going to have conversations around dreams and sovereignty. Now, wherever that's going to take us, we haven't got a clue. So stick with us.
Excellent. And I am Marisa Goudy. I am the writer of The Sovereignty Knot, A Woman's Way to Freedom, Power, Love, and Magic. And I am deeply grateful to whatever early in the pandemic forces caused Pearl to send me an email to begin a conversation that we have been having both over Zoom and via email for a year and a half now. And so this is a conversation whose time has come in many ways. And again, we enter into it with a spirit of great openness and unfettered optimism was a phrase that came through for Pearl and me when we were speaking just last week. So Pearl, there was right before we started recording, there was a line actually from my book that you had mentioned as something that stood out for you. Maybe we should use that as our jumping off point.
That was a great line. The line is, we are sovereign souls living one great interconnected dream. So it links your work and mine in one sentence in the introduction, in chapter 1 of your book. So when I think of a great interconnected dream, I think of the entire cosmos being interconnected. And I think of last week we spoke about the great immensity of the cosmos and the awe. Now, when I first got into dream work, I was in awe of the inner world, the cosmic inner world. And I realized my inner world is interconnected with my outer world. And that's part of becoming sovereign, I think, if I'm understanding your work. So when I say all those things, what are you thinking?
Well, it's so interesting to realize that when I would have written that line well over 2 years ago now, it was before I had met you, before I'd met another dream worker that I've been working with closely. And I feel like I would use the word dream now. I think I might still use it, but I would use it with a greater sense of awareness and awe. And when we dig deep enough, eventually words become more than just words. We start to understand the symbols that we were already carrying around, but maybe didn't have access to before. And so that's the first thing that occurs to me. And the second piece is, again, from that conversation you and I had, where you brought in the cosmic many times in the course of our conversation. And oftentimes it was in noticing in my book where I would use the world. And you pushed me to realize that sense of, well, why is it just the world? Is it just this particular planet on which we live? Doesn't it ripple forth well beyond the boundaries of our specific atmosphere? So I have been really working with that and calling that through. Again, it doesn't make what I said in my book untrue, but it makes it like, oh, there's more echoes to this that I hadn't yet seen. And I think that's, of course, why we share our work. That's why we have readers. That's why we have conversations to keep going further and saying, oh, I didn't know that's what I meant, but thank you for helping me see it's this and.
It's kind of like with dreams. We're always, when I started working with dreams some 30 years ago, I was in a desperate place in my life. I was clinically depressed, under psychiatric care, et cetera, et cetera. And I wasn't thinking about the cosmos. I was thinking about, oh my God, how do I get out of this black place? I've been in this black place for a very long time. And now 33 years later, I think when I say even say the number 33, there's symbolic meaning there. Every word that comes out of my mouth, I can stop and go, wow, I wonder what's that linked to? Because everything is linked to everything. And looking around the world, I mean, I can read again from something we talked about. Slowly, immensity becomes a primal value. Just think about that sentence. Immensity becomes a primal value. We're going back to the old Earth mothers with that primal value of immensity. They looked up at the stars and they knew they were in a universe. I don't know if they had that language, but I think we're going back and learning what they knew a long time ago. And I saw a lot of that in your work around the Celtic mythology. I mean, that's old stuff.
Right. And I love that you mentioned that too, because it reminds us that, even as you said, hey, but what about the cosmos? You were absolutely including our relationship to nature, to the earth, to the great mothers, to the stories that, weave through the land and the people and all the stories we've told ever since. It just enables us to say, yes, and we're invited to keep thinking more expansively. Because I think the quest of both the work that you and I do is here we are and let's keep going. And it's not in a constant hunger for progress and that very masculine patriarchal, like the lion has to keep going like this, otherwise it's not growth. It's instead that sense of the concentric circles and spiraling of growing outward and growing inward and recognizing it's deeply nonlinear, right?
And when you use the word not linear, I think instantly of a labyrinth.
Yes.
And when I was writing my books, I mean, it took many years to get to that place where I sat down. In fact, it took until January 2015 from 1988. That's a long time. I sat down and I began to write. And when I finally figured out that I needed a copy editor, I mean, I started out clueless. The copy editor said, "Bro, you go in circles." I'm going, that's right, I do. And that's the feminine way. And I'm going in circles. Thank you very much. And that's the way, that's just my way.
Right.
I don't do linear. And it's always, that was an interesting thing to realize. Right. That we're trained linear. Our whole education system says there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. Actually, no, there isn't. It's like those dolls, the Russian dolls.
Yes.
One inside the other, maiden, mother, crone. There's not linear. Right. I've still got my maiden and I better have her, otherwise we're all in trouble.
Yes.
And
yes.
Your princess, if you don't have your princess and you can't go play and put on your crown and go out and skip around the park, you're in trouble.
Right. And so, heaven help your children if you happen to have them.
Well, no kidding. I mean, think about the story you told me before we began this conversation. I mean, the magic of childhood should stay with us. The magic till it's the magic of old age that brings the child forth. And to me, it's a lot more interesting life if I can go out and be in awe like a child is in awe. I mean, I have grandchildren. I mean, you have young children. I have a 7-year-old grandson and a 25-year-old grandson and a few sandwiched in the middle. So that little guy, I mean, he'll stop and look at a spider and just, so Grandma, where do you think he came from? Well, darn good question. Where do I think he came from? Well, I mean, that's the awe in immensity.
Yes. And finding it in the minuscule.
In a spider, or finding it in, I mean, just outside my door, I live on the farm. There's a little cluster. It's about an inch wide, several different clusters on the siding of the house. It's nests of spiders. I'm watching them, and every day they're a little bit bigger, and the kids are saying, Mom, are you sure you're like, shouldn't you move them? They'll go in the house. I'm like, they never come in the house. They just get born there. They're cool to
Yeah.
watch.
Right.
And so if the
Right.
old lady can find awe in a bunch of spiders being born outside their window, I think life is still pretty much worth living, no matter how old you get and how much of a crone you are.
Mm.
So
And
that
there's so much imagery in the spider and in the webs and all of those. I mean,
yeah,
layer upon layer upon layer.
layer upon layer upon layer, deeper and deeper and deeper, and higher and more sideways. I mean, you go where you need to go.
Right.
And it's there's a great notion of being liberated from your own thoughts.
Hmm.
And I think we liberate, well, maybe we don't recognize, but we liberate the princess.
Mm-hmm.
If we've decided, well, we don't need to be a child anymore, we might have to go back and liberate her out of the tower, fairy tales.
Right. Right. Well, as you may recall, I think it's in the book and not just something I talk about. We forget, of course, what we write. When I first met the princess as the archetype that I would write about, I thought it was my job to slay her. I thought it was that sense of, rather than saving the princess, I'm here to slay the princess, because I was 33. I was waking up to that moment of saying, I don't know how I got here, but I am completely reliant upon my husband and father, monetarily, emotionally. I was raising up at that point. My daughter was 3, and I was still mourning the death of my mother, and I was recognizing the degree to which I had lost track of myself. And my first thought was, I have to slay the princess. And then, of course, so it came out as slay the princess, crown the queen. I hadn't met the wise woman yet, who, of course, was the one who came in and said, now, you're not going to slay anyone. That's the, as kindly as you could, that is just dead wrong, sister. We are instead going to free the princess, crown the queen. And that was that moment when I was first able to articulate, oh, embrace the wise woman. That's the piece of me that reminds me that we are not here to slice off any part of ourselves or our stories that are so integral to our becoming and our ongoing becoming, right?
And when you use that word becoming, you think about becoming. I mean, we arrive on the planet. We're actually we've got everything we need when we arrive. We just don't know it. And our culture teaches us, oh no, you've got to go outside of yourself to learn all of this. When in fact, you just need a couple of really good books and nature.
Yes.
And you will learn everything you need to know. Your own inner world, and paying attention to your outer world. When you lose your mother, you were 33, you said.
I was 30 when my mother died, 33 when the princess, queen, and wise woman came in.
Right. And that's very interesting timing from the perspective of the dream world. When people come to me to work with dreams, I love to find out their ages. So how old are you? Well, I'm 70, or I'm 40, or I'm 30. Those decade years. So, well, that's very interesting. What do you need to learn? What are you trying to learn? You were going to learn independence. You were going to, or you wanted to become, listen, I don't want to be dependent on my father and my husband. Not where I want to be. I'm thinking you had your work cut out for you. So how did you go about that work of becoming sovereign?
Right. Well, they were words that I'd long had, right? I had fallen in love with the sovereignty goddess back when I was, getting my first degree in Irish literature. The sovereignty goddess is, deeply embedded in the entire Celtic tradition. She is the embodiment of the land itself. And she is this, divine human figure that comes in at points when the land needs her to be embodied, to find the right ruler for the land, right? So it definitely appealed to my own fantastical, Dungeons and Dragons style teenager that I was. And, because then I was always in search of the goddess. And because I grew up in the Catholic tradition where I never could find a home, and Mary was wonderful, but she didn't quite have the earth beneath her feet, I think, the degree to which I needed her to find the tradition that would be home for me. So knowing that I had that phrase and lost it through my 20s in that patriarchal journey of, get a job, get a guy, get married, have a kid, okay, got a house, got all the things, my mother's dead. And that all of a sudden just shook my whole world. I quit my job. We had a 2-income home that all of a sudden had 1 income in supporting it. And I'm home with my daughter trying to start up my own business as a copywriter and copy editor in many ways, trying to ask very spirally people to occasionally write in a straight line, and working with very linear people in very masculine spaces doing marketing work, and really feeling very injured by that, because that was the interesting thing for me in this process. I had been trying to work really hard while raising my daughter. I was, doing marketing for local dentists and doctors and trying to make it work. And I think that was the hardest part of the whole thing, is that I hadn't just been sitting around, baking cookies and finger painting. I had been home with my daughter, desperately trying to put together a new life that didn't have me going to an office from 9 to 5, that didn't have me putting more than half of my income toward childcare. And being in a world that says, welcome to all the freedoms of the 21st century, you can have it all, but it's going to really hurt under the hood. And so that was really and I was sitting on my front porch watching my daughter do sidewalk chalk when the whole thing kind of came through like a download that said, I am so fortunate and so blessed and so trapped. How did I get here? I have been a feminist my whole life. How did it happen? And there was a moment of rebirth.
So you came to feminism a lot younger than I did.
Well, I was raised by a woman born in 1950 who would have really been in the center of second wave feminism, was among the first classes to be going co-ed to school in the late 60s and to going to colleges. So yeah, it was easier to come by in certain ways. And yet it's amazing how the rug kept getting yanked out, because it was like it ended the day I finished university, because the real world came in.
Right. And the real world, I mean, that's an interesting phrase. And it's interesting how you use the word download. Because there's a phrase somewhere that says, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. And it's kind of like, it is a download, that whoever that teacher is, it might be a book. It might be a conversation on a podcast, although we didn't have those in the 50s and 60s. I mean, when you talk about co-ed, I actually taught my very first year where I was the only teacher in the high school. And my job, if you can believe this, 1968, the principal said, your job is to make sure the girls' skirts are X amount of inches, I don't remember, off the floor, and if there's any that are too short, measure them and send the kids to the office. Well, the girls and I, when we were friends now, I'm 76, those girls are turning 60 or more, and we howl with laughter. Are you kidding? I said, so how many skirts did I measure? And they go, well, you sure as heck never measured any skirts that we saw. I mean, think about that. And the principal would put those boys in the car and take them downtown for a haircut.
Right.
I mean, we are talking, the 60s liberation didn't hit until the 70s or 80s in many, many places. It's not New York. It's rural Alberta. And whereas I get very upset when people say the rural people don't know this, that, and the other thing. And I go, you don't understand. They understand the earth. Knowing the sidewalks of New York may be very wonderful, and I'd love it. I've been there, but knowing the earth underneath my feet, and without 6 inches of topsoil and some rain, the whole anthropomorphic people upon the planet will disappear.
Right. Yes.
You know,
Yes.
so we struggle with all of these things of growing up. I mean,
Mhm.
literally, in Jungian psychology, and I'm not a Jungian, but I have studied it for years, we talk about individuation. And that's
Right.
what started to happen that day when you were sitting watching your daughter play on the sidewalk and going, oh my God, how did I get here? Who am I?
Yes.
Where did this person
Yes.
come from?
Right. Right.
And
And I thought I was too smart to end up here, but I did.
well, yeah, I mean, and that's an interesting phrase, Marissa. I thought I was too smart. Intellectually, we're brilliant. Emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, wow,
Mhm.
do we have stuff to learn?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Really, I mean, I started my journey in April of 1988 when a girlfriend said, you have done everything, girl. Like, okay, let's try something else. You've got to shake this depression thing.
Mm.
I started meditation.
Yeah.
Now, meditation, I don't know the Catholic circles you were raised in. I know the ones I was raised in. The Western Catholic Reporter said that meditation and yoga are openings to evil.
Mm.
Now, you know, what can I say? I can laugh, but that's a
Right.
serious belief people have. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you overcome a serious belief?
Right. You know, I can't help but laugh. When I was reading over your book this morning, you mentioned that same Catholic reporter, and it might have been in a different something they had mentioned, and they were decrying the evils of X, Y, or the other. And you said in the next sentence, I didn't cancel my subscription. Didn't occur to me to cancel my subscription.
No, because I like to know what the other is thinking. I can't change
Right.
my own beliefs till I really know what mine are. If I don't know
Mm-hmm.
I believe stuff, and that
Mm-hmm.
in dream work is the collective unconscious. We
Mm.
don't
Right.
know about 95% of what is our full potential. Think about that,
Yes.
Marissa. We're leaving ourselves on the table.
Mm-hmm.
We're not tapping into our full potential.
So why do you think that is?
Well, why? I think we're afraid of knowing that we are gods and goddesses, that we are divine.
Mm.
I think it scared
Mm.
the bejesus out of us.
Mm.
Think
Mm-hmm.
about it. Like, if you knew your full power and potential, somewhere it's written, I don't remember who, but I will credit whoever it was, that the thing we most fear is ourselves and our own power.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think too that the power within us would burn out our circuits if we got too big of a download at one time.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
you've read, I don't know how far you've read in my books, but you know that February 7th, for example, 1989, I had an experience I'm still processing some of that experience.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was profound. My whole body turned blue. I could see through my hands, translucent.
Mm.
And I am mumbling to myself, that poor man, that poor man. And out of me and out of my memory and out of this whole moment, and I don't know if it was one moment, a half an hour, I have no way to know.
Is this the meditation experience you describe in
Yeah,
the book?
it's a
Help us. Yeah.
I had
Mhm.
dozens of them between April and December, and then massive ones in January and February. But the one where the healing occurred,
Mhm.
I talk about the physical. Physically, I had never had a normal menstrual cycle in my life. I'm 43 at this point. I have 3 children. my life, well, you might have a menstrual cycle every 6 months, one every 2 months, sometimes 8 or 9 months. It's kind of hard to know what's going on. Mine went regular after that. That's called
Wow.
cellular healing.
Yes.
That
Yes.
is
Yes.
our potential.
Hmm.
I mean, people read that and they don't actually read it. It doesn't go in.
Right.
And we
Right.
talk about, I still wasn't sovereign in that moment. I don't know if I'm still sovereign, even at this age.
Right.
Some moments I
I
am.
right. But I don't think that sovereignty ever becomes a place at which to arrive and say, here
No,
I am on the mountain. I'm now going to what? Set up my ashram and never interact with anyone again. That's not, it's a phrase from, I remember Carolyn Mace offered the phrase of we're all mystics without monasteries.
yeah,
So, in that same spirit, when we are going to live a non monastic life in the rough and tumble and nonsense and all of the other things, none of these are set solid states in the same, whether it's being sovereign or I've been talking to a lot of clients lately about, there's such that goal of like, I want to be the Queen of Cups in the tarot. I want to embody her. She's my ultimate. And it's the sense of, and often it's like, well, when my business does this, or my kids are doing this, or whatever the thing is, the illusions we tell ourselves, it's that sense of, well, when you do have that house and that level of success, do you think you're just going to sit there just holding the cup and gazing at your reflection lovingly and offering it to others without another storm coming in that says, the dog runs in, rushes past your feet, you drop the cup and you're back at the fool all over again? And we always get to go because who just wants to sit and hold the cup like a grail maiden for the rest of our lives?
no, we
We
are
don't
that.
actually, but we've been told we do, and we've been going for a dream that isn't necessarily even ours.
We actually think there's somewhere to go or somewhere to get. My
Right.
inner voice told me one day in meditation, there is nowhere to get.
Mm.
Think about that. There's nowhere
Right.
to get. We've been
Yes.
sold the Canadian dream or the American dream,
Hmm.
this, which is very much a linear materialistic approach. There's very little
Hmm.
reverence for the earth.
Hmm.
The earth is a commodity to be used for our gratification. Well,
Right.
this process that we're on, I think that I'm on anyway, is learning that I am both the most or the least significant little tiny speck on a planet that is, or in a universe. Think about a universe. And there I am, worrying about whether I
Hmm.
can hold the cup and be the Queen of Cups.
Right.
Probably a bit of a waste of my time.
Probably.
So,
What occurs to me too, as you mentioned that our, Canadian American colonial European dream that we've all grown on this particular continent, how much, and you and I both coming from the Catholic tradition and from a Christian tradition, that sense of, well, the place to get was to get to heaven, right? I mean, that has to have informed us after 2,000 years of patterning that we're so, and obviously it's in other traditions too, whether it's Valhalla or it's Tir na Nog, like different traditions have that sense of, and then someday you will reach
yes.
the land of milk and honey or whatever it is. And that seems like a very odd and enduring human habit. Is it a glitch in
Oh,
our
I
programming?
don't think it's a habit, and I don't think it's even human. I
Oh,
think
say
it's
more.
anti-human.
No, anti-human.
Anti-human. Because
Mm,
I'm 76. The average lifespan is, I don't know, 82 or something. Well,
right.
I there is nowhere to get. There's no heaven. I hate to break it to
Right.
you. Uh, quantum physics says there is no place. That's not reality. There's no place to get. Actually, if you read
Hmm.
Matthew Fox, I love that because Matthew
Hmm.
Fox writes a book about Julian of Norwich, And whereas religion gets quite a bad rap, there are some amazing pieces to it that we never heard about. The masses, pardon me, pardon the pun, we didn't hear about it in the masses.
Right.
We didn't hear about it in the pew. We have to find it for ourselves. The mystics, Julian of Norwich, I was reading when I was 12 or 13 years old. I've been enamored with the earth since I'm born. But then I consulted an astrologist recently, a psychological astrology reader. I am married to the earth. I was born kind of like we all are. We have stardust. We come from stardust, but we're just earth people. And we've ignored that to our peril.
Yes.
Think about your Celtic background, St. Brigid. I mean, have you ever been to St. Brigid's Garden in Ireland? I'm sure you have.
In Kildare, yes.
I mean, talk about amazing. Talk about the way that garden has been set up. And then go back to Matthew Fox, and he says we lost touch with the earth in the last pandemic, in the lifetime of Julian of Norwich.
So that would have been like the bubonic plague going through Europe.
Yeah,
and the Black
Death. Plague. We lost about somewhere, depending on who you read and what the research is, between a third and a half of the European population. And they blamed it on the earth. They didn't have, remember, they didn't have germology. They didn't have virologists. They didn't have immunologists.
Right.
And they had the earth, and they thought the earth had turned against them, that they were being punished by God. Now, I've heard the odd American preacher say the same thing. This is punishment from God. I'm here to say it isn't. It simply isn't. Because the pandemic is gone and we're still here.
Right.
But that's when the notion of flagellation came into being. Can you believe that? And so I'm reading.
So self-hatred, true self-loathing in a spiritual context.
That's right, because in the spiritual sense, because you had to get rid of the evil in your body, and the evil in earth, and you had to propitiate the gods. Well, think about that. That's an old Zeus god. We had to keep
an old what?
Zeus.
Oh, Zeus, yeah.
We always had to keep him happy. Human sacrifice. I mean, I could go on and on, but the notion that they've got a new pandemic and it didn't come from, but look at people try to blame it on the pigs, or that somehow again nature got into it. Oh, for heaven's sakes.
Right.
So we've got lots to learn about the earth and our place on it, or in it, or with it. We're only part of it.
Yes.
And to be sovereign over the earth, we actually thought we're going to control the earth. We need to just be worried about our own sovereignty, like your book says. I'm developing my own sovereignty, and I need to be my own goddess, but the goddess comes from the earth. That's why the patriarchy had to get rid of her.
Right. Because they wanted us to be stewards, right? They wanted to only focus on the king and the steward, right? And I forget which gospel writer offers that whole idea of.
I would say they didn't think we needed to be stewards. They turned it into we needed to be conquerors, dominators.
Yes. Well, doesn't I again, as a quote unquote good Catholic, I didn't even think to read a Bible till I went to college. There is stewardship comes in a lot as a phrase.
The Bible says you are stewards, or you are to be stewards. I mean, I'm not a Bible scholar by far. Catholics generally weren't back then.
Right.
At the age of 16, I was out of school with my depressions, and I was at home, and I'm 16. I read the Bible through twice.
Really?
The only place that I felt safe was in the grotto in Mid-Nepal, where I was in school. And Mother Mary, to me, is the earth goddess. But my Mother Mary wears red, not pastel blue. So, there's much to be said there. But I digress. I mean, the Earth Mother is what we have left out of our economy. I mean, you can go into climate change and all kinds of nasty places this morning. We don't probably want to do that, but we want to look at the earth goddesses. And
Right.
Brigid really was, well, the Catholic Church kept the goddess, but they never could use the name.
Well, St. Bridget certainly has her pretty big presence in Ireland. And
Absolutely.
Ireland being so unique, she's held on to a great number of her pagan origins. And I mean, it's the greatest witchcraft in the world is that which the Christian church did when moving in and subsuming subsuming goddesses of rivers and flames, and whether it was a mountain or it was a person in town who was the wise woman at the end of the lane. Like, the PR that the church had in the early
Oh,
days was just,
well,
on it.
but what I always say to people is, remember, that was not malice aforethought. That
Right.
was, they were living it, and that it was, they believed it was not good. They learned
Right.
the pandemic in the 1300s, that's evil. Well,
Hmm.
we're undoing that now. Well, it's a lot of work.
Right.
I think
Right.
your work, my work, we're cut out for looking and making sure that at least I go sit at the foot of the mountain and revere the immensity of that mountain. Think
Yeah.
about, it's just like, it is, it's so powerful. And that's what we're bringing back is the earth goddess, Celtic goddesses. That's why I went to Ireland.
Yeah.
I went over there to visit the Isle of the White Goddess.
Hmm.
I went over there to see the sacred wells. I mean, I was with the Abbey of the Arts, Christine Voltner, or Paintner Voltner, if I'll get her name backwards, but she writes exquisite books around the earth and the spirituality of the earth. And that's what I've learned. I've learned a lot of that in dreams. A lot of that in dreams.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of lost where we were going with this at the moment, but
I think that says we've landed at the foot of a mountain. We've landed with this reaffirmation of the goddess, of the earth goddess, of so much of what connects you and me across thousands of miles with elements of shared traditions, and yet so much of our own, generational information and all the pieces that make us at once so very, very
takes us
similar.
back to the
And
first sentence, Marisa. Takes us back, right back to the first sentence. We are sovereign souls living one great interconnected dream.
interconnected dream. So that's the title of this conversation. What I hope is the first of many that we will have and share with others. I'm so grateful for everything that we've explored today. I think that I always think in terms of cauldrons, and sometimes it's that sense that there's one great cauldron we're all adding into, which is part of the Celtic tradition, but it's also that sense of all those little cauldrons of life and conversation and possibility that we can dive into, leave off at the edge, leave us hanging, come back to, they're there. And I think there's a lot more for us to explore as we keep going.
I think we've kind of just experienced a really interesting conversation. And Cauldron is a great place to end because the title of my third book is Cauldron of the Feminine.
Of course. Of course. Excellent. Well, Pearl, thank you so much. I'm so excited that we've begun this journey together into becoming and also a lot of undoing. I think there's a lot to be pulled away and a lot to be woven at the same time.
Talk to you soon.
Excellent.